Welcome to the Capital News. I'm your host, Alex Karitis. Today is Monday, May 10th, 2021. Thank you so much for joining me. Hope you all enjoyed your weekend, and a happy belated Mother's Day to all those moms out there. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you were spoiled like you deserve it. Title of today's podcast, Nation Against Nation. We've talked here at length for the past couple of years with protests and riots and revolutions and military coups, what have you, really gaining traction in 2019, going underground or at least pausing due to the pandemic, the lockdowns, restrictions, what have you, gaining steam once again throughout 2021. We're already in the month of May, gaining more traction, a lot of tensions flaring up, getting worse depending on the region, a lot of civil wars, a lot of protests, a lot of other social and economic movements, if you will, that aren't getting enough attention. They're being discussed. You'll find articles on them. You'll get some headlines. You'll get a short story here or there. This, to me, is the big ticket. This is what really needs a lot of focus and attention. We can all hope and pray for peaceful solutions, but I cannot recall a time in recent history where we've seen so much dry tinder and kindling all over the place, and all it's going to take is a very small spark to ignite this whole thing. A lot of dominoes are in place, and it's not going to take that much to knock them down. And it could come from anywhere. It could be an economic situation. It could be a political situation. It could be something that happens with respect to some sort of social movement somewhere. And these things are contagious, as I argued last week. They are something that can go viral very quickly. So you might get some sort of major news network suppression depending on what country you're in, but it's going to be difficult to really shut it all out because of the prevalence and the usage of social media. And a lot of these movements are, of course, being organized by younger people. They are very familiar with social media. They use it every single day. That's where their friends are. Other people see this around the globe. And so these types of movements are contagious because depending on where you are, it could be a very inspirational story. You know, whether history proves that out to be justified to be inspirational or not, people come up with stories, there are myths, and that's how it's perceived. That's reality, especially when you're in these types of heightened environments where there's so much that is going wrong and so much more that unfortunately can go wrong. We are just in the early innings of this massive global inflationary environment as far as I'm concerned. This is not going to be transitory. This is not going to be temporary, no matter how many times they tell us. We're already starting to witness some smaller countries, some not so small, identifying and acknowledging that inflation exists, and a couple of their central banks are taking actions to fend it off by increasing their interest rates. Now, there's not much talk about that actually taking place in those larger economies, such as the United States with the Federal Reserve, or the European nations with the ECB, or with the Bank of Japan, with the Reserve Bank of Australia, etc. Now, they might start to kind of taper off a little bit with, and all I mean by that is, instead of the Federal Reserve throwing $120 billion a month into the system, they might make it $100 billion by the end of the year or something like that. That's going to be it, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think they'll end up throwing more into the system because we're getting a little bit of a sell-off today. One day doesn't make a trend. Of course, the markets and the media want to jack it up as if, well, this is everything's breaking loose because the S&P sold off by 1%. Yeah, okay, so we're still 1% off of all-time highs. Give me a break. But I think this heightened anxiety throughout the system, throughout the media, throughout the markets is indicative of people understanding, and that's what markets are. There's only people. People understanding how fragile this system is. Now, they might get on CNBC and Fox Business and talk their book of business up and say everything's great, the recovery's well underway, buy this, buy that, and buy some of this too, just in case. But everybody, I think, knows intuitively in their gut that this is all an inflationary bubble. Remove all of the fiscal and monetary stimulus from one government and one central bank after the next, and where are you going to find yourself? Right? It's very simple. Just say, hey, you're so confident that everything's great. Well, then the Federal Reserve, the ECB, Bank of England, all of them can pull out all that money. They can stop today. They can raise interest rates. They can start reducing their balance sheets. What's the problem? Oh, no, you can't do that. And then they're going to show you their cards. It's all it takes. Very simple. Basic, commonsensical questions off of very simple observations. We're starting to get some of these tougher questions being asked, and they're not that tough. They're basic questions. Again, they're common sense, very logical. But Jay Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, can't answer them. Our Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, can't answer them. Christine Lagarde, the president of the ECB, cannot answer them. Okay, we're dealing now with a very dangerous combination, as I've been saying, with these central bankers. It's one thing to deal with their incompetence. It's another to deal with their arrogance as well, which is really starting to come to the forefront here. Especially with what Christine Lagarde said a handful of weeks ago, basically taunting the market, saying, bring it on. As if to say, if you try to put downward pressure on these markets, especially the equity market, or perhaps the bond market as well, and getting yields higher, she's going to say, bring it on. Our central banks are united. We will beat you. Now, they can get away with it for a while, and they've gotten away with it for longer than I have anticipated. And that's to our detriment, because the further they push this out, the worse it's going to be when markets correct. Because despite how powerful and influential one government, one central bank might be, or in combination that they are not bigger, they are not more powerful than the marketplace. And this party might be good. A lot of people might feel good from this inflationary high. But guess what? Just like every party, there is a bill associated with it. And nobody wants to pay the bill at the end of the day. But that's exactly what's going to have to happen here. And a lot of people are starting to see, I think, and it's going to be an extremely rude awakening for most, because they thought the government was their pal, their buddy, their best friend. Of course, that's a joke, but that's what they thought. Because, I don't have to pay my student loans, I don't have to pay my rent, I don't have to pay my mortgage, and they're giving me money. They're giving me one stimulus check, another stimulus check, another stimulus check. They're giving me extra benefits on my unemployment. They all thought this was a gift. They all thought this was just, free money. They're going to find out that this was the most expensive deal they've ever made in their lives. If it's not just because of the supply chain disruptions caused by the pandemic, there were already supply chain disruptions in 2019 due to the trade wars. Again, we're dealing with a triple whammy here. We have the trade wars, we have the fiscal response, which caused the Great Depression in the 1930s. We have this fascination with the tech sector. They can only go up. Cryptocurrencies, this ludicrous fascination, this casino-like activity, reminiscent of the dot-com era, didn't end well. And then, of course, we have the real estate market on fire, especially the residential market on fire in many parts of the country, pricing out a generation of would-be home buyers. And as I stated last week, something to keep on the back burner of your mind, too, should the Democrats and the president sign into law something that has to do with the reduction of student debt, that's going to be another deal with the devil, because everybody's going to say, now I don't have this burden. Now I have this extra cash. I can devote it to go buying cars. I can devote it to go buying houses. And all that's going to do is push all of these assets up and up and up, and they're already in the stratosphere as it is. But we're told on a near daily basis from somebody in the administration, Congress, the Federal Reserve, what have you, that there is no inflation. This is just getting started. I am very concerned about global food prices, because revolutions are fought on empty stomachs. You want a good barometer for tracking revolutions throughout history? Look at the price of bread. Wheat is going way up, folks, and I think it's going to go much higher as we make our way through this year and next year. Not only do we have the supply chain disruptions, not only do we have out-of-control governments and central banks, but we also have some strange weather patterns taking place too globally. Whether it's drought, whether it's excess rain that's non-typical this time of the year, or it's colder this time of the year than it usually is, that all affects the growing season. That is going to impact the supply. And it might just be a delay in the supply. Instead of planting this week, maybe you plant next week, or et cetera, but that is going to have a ripple effect at every point down the supply chain. We're already hearing from one major corporation after the next that they are going to be increasing their prices if they haven't done so already. And as I like to repeat and remind the audience, don't just pay attention to the price, but pay attention to the weight, the volume in which you are receiving. Something used to be 16 ounces. Is it now 14 ounces? Did you used to get a count of 50 something? Now you're getting 48 or 40. Pay attention to that too, because that most definitely is taking place. Market performance, we have the dollar index trading flat at 90.23, 90.23 on the dollar index. Bitcoin is at $55,200 a coin, down a little over 1%. Not too much movement in the major currency pairs on the Forex market. However, the euro against the dollar is trading at $1.21, and the British pound to the US dollar is at $1.41, so that has made a move over the past couple of days with the dollar weakening. Overnight futures trading, we have the Dow Jones Industrial Average down about 0.2%. The S&P 500 also in the red, down about 0.33%. NASDAQ 100 also in the red, down about 0.6%. A big sell-off over in Japan. Cash trade down 3.2%, a loss of 938 points to trade at 28,580 points. Currently, at the time of the podcast, again, down 3.2%. Japanese cash trade. Mixed bag across the pond in Europe. Biggest gainers being the Italian and Spanish markets, putting on a gain of about 0.8% respectively. Australian stocks also down in cash trade, down 1% currently. Chinese stocks are up 0.2%. And the Indian exchange is down 0.8%. On the commodity front, little bit of a pullback here. We have WTI at $64.67, Brent $68 even, natural gas $2.91, gasoline $2.12. We anticipate gasoline prices are going to be moving much higher over the spring and summer months, and as many of you are aware, we had the hacking, if you will, of the Colonial Pipeline, which is a major supplier of gasoline and fuel on the east coast of the U.S. That is hopefully being resolved, but it could take a little bit longer than anticipated. We heard this before too, right? With the Suez Canal fiasco a handful of weeks ago. Oh, we'll take care of this thing a couple days, and then it was a couple more days, and then it was a couple more days, and then it was a couple more days. So hopefully they can get this issue with the pipeline rectified, but I'm not holding my breath. But this is just going to be something else that's used as another excuse to say, oh, well, yeah, higher prices, but that's not inflation. That's just because of this. Okay, it's all with these stories. It's all with the narrative. I'm not saying this is any type of conspiracy theory. You know, we have the FBI out saying that this was a hacker group within Russia that's responsible for this. So, look, this is something that needs to be treated very seriously, because it just shows the dependency of the energy markets for for all economies. We are extremely dependent on energy. Everybody uses it, and it wouldn't matter if it's fossil fuels, or quote unquote green energy, renewable resources. Extremely fragile. And this is something that needs to be addressed, seriously addressed, when it comes to any type of infrastructure bill that is put forward. Needs to be considered. It's a national security issue. Energy is always a national security issue as far as I'm concerned, as is food. You have to pay attention to what people actually need, and that's why I am concerned, and that's why my analysis continues to point me in the direction of inflation, stagflation, and depending where you are, maybe hyperinflation. Because I am not concerned with the things that you do not need. I am concerned with the things that you do need. That's where you're going to get all of these higher prices. Food, energy, commodities. Revolutions are fought on empty stomachs. Poorer people around the world, and even in this country, the United States, spend a disproportionate amount of their income on food, the basic necessities. Once you start to see that ratio of their income going more and more to paying for food, that's when you're going to start seeing these dams break all over the place, and we're already starting to see it. Yes, the news can say it was this proposal, this tax hike proposal, this fuel surcharge, etc., etc. That was the last straw. That was it. But it's always deeper rooted than that. And that's what you have to pay attention to. What was sparking the flame, getting this thing going down in Colombia, which continues, and we talked about this last week, but those protests are continuing. What was the final straw was a tax hike. That proposal has been removed. Yet the people are still protesting. Why? Because that was just the final straw. There was so much more. There are so many other structural issues that need to be contended with down in Colombia and so many other countries. Younger people know that they've been dealt a very, very, very bad hand. And they know that they're the ones that are going to have to pay for this. And they're sick and tired of it, and rightly so. But this is going to affect a lot more than just younger people. Believe me when I tell you. So there's that, and we have gold at $1,836 an ounce, silver $27.40 an ounce. Both gold and silver started out the day doing pretty well, and then they reversed course, but both are currently up slightly in the overnight session. Copper is at $4.79 a pound. Lumber actually pulled back a little bit and is trading at $1,600 per 1,000 linear board feet, $1,600. Nothing goes straight up despite the missile launch of lumber recently. We've seen these types of pullbacks before. This is nothing drastic. We've seen 33% one-day decline in the price of lumber late last year, only to recover, only to make new all-time highs, and basically double from that point. So we know what this is doing to new home builds. We know what this is doing to rents. It's moving them up and away. And a lot of people think that this is going to end badly, and it very well could. It very well could, but I think there's a lot of staying power with respect to this housing bubble, at least through the remainder of this year. Off of supply and demand dynamics alone, then you take into consideration what the federal government might continue to do with some sort of stimulus or other forbearance measures, what the Federal Reserve is doing with all the money printing, and again, just with those supply and demand dynamics, because a lot of the home builders are not building a lot of starter homes. They're building bigger homes or more luxurious homes because that's where they're getting margins. And a lot of people are doing well in the stock market. They have their careers in place. They're maybe looking to move up a little bit. And so they're spending the money. Plus, you have interest rates at all-time lows. And mortgage companies, you got to have excellent credit. So that's where it's all flowing. So a lot of home builders are not going to build homes if they can't sell them. Because if they're going to be selling them to people that have a lot of debt as it is, student debt, don't have a good source of income, they're not steady, they're not stable in their career, what have you, not good credit, not going to get approved, not going to buy the home, they can't sell it, what good is building it? So this is all of the distortionary problems and effects that come into place when the government gets involved and when central banks do what they have been doing. What don't you understand? This was not a free lunch. This is not a gift. This was really them, the powers that be, our government, our central bank, and those globally, saving their own rear ends because all they were trying to do was fend off the inevitable, and the inevitable is here, ladies and gentlemen. It is these riots. It is these protests. It is these military coups. It is these revolutions that are underway. Because the powers that be do not want to take any responsibility whatsoever. The Democrats in this country want to blame the Republicans. The Republicans want to blame the Democrats. I blame all of them. And I blame the people of this country, too, for allowing it to happen. You don't get $28.5 trillion in a national debt, which we're getting closer to by the day, just because of the Democrats or just because of the Republicans. You get it because of all of them. And nobody has a spine. They're all weasels. Do not support them. Do not give them your vote. They want to distract you with gay rights, transsexual rights, what you can read, what you can't read. Dr. Seuss is a racist. Mr. Potato Head's a sexist. This is what they want to distract you with. This is what they want to distract you with. Focus on the major points here. They want to get you in the weeds with these social issues, which get you upset. They want us, we the people, fighting each other. You understand this? It's pretty easy to see, and it is very upsetting when they say certain things, if they make race a big issue. And a lot of white people out there, the furthest thing from being a racist. And of course, anybody can be a racist. It's not exclusive to white people. Black people can be racist. Asians can be racist. Hispanics can be racist. Anybody can be a racist. But it's very upsetting when you know in your heart of hearts that you are not a racist, that members of your family are not racist, but you continue to be called one. How is that going to make any sense? It doesn't. But it gets you upset. And then you start thinking, okay, somebody's looking at me this way. They must think I'm a racist. And you go at it. That is extremely unhealthy. Do not fall for these tricks. Keep your eye on the prize. The prize is always following the money. Where is it going? Who's getting it? Okay? And as we know, when we look at the wealth inequality that exists in this country and globally, that is also something that is going to cause a lot of problems with respect to these protests and revolutions, because people are upset. People are living paycheck to paycheck. People don't have a job. And then you got Jeff Bezos. You know, it's being plastered all over the media here that he, you know, what's his yacht? 417 feet, $500 million, and he has to have another yacht to follow the bigger yacht, to supply the bigger yacht. Yeah, that's exactly what's going on here. I do not demonize wealth. I want everybody to be successful. I'm a free market capitalist here. But you cannot have these types of actions, because this wasn't just from organic growth here. This is from a lot of money printing. And this is what happens. These are the results. We got people starving to death. And yet the Federal Reserve can't figure out how to give money to these people. But it has no problem figuring out how to give money to the largest corporations on the planet who don't need the cash. He can figure that out. He is not authorized to do so, but he did. It was an emergency. It was an emergency. It was an emergency. So the emergency facilities were established very, very quickly in the event of the pandemic and the lockdowns. Oh, we have to throw liquidity into the system. We have to give all of this money to all of these major corporations that don't need it. They can figure that out, but they can't figure out how to give it to those people living in those tent cities, even in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, where Jerome Powell drives past these tent cities before he gets to work. I don't know how to give it to him. He can't figure it out. He needs to be sat down and spoken to. We got to start asking some serious questions of these people. But the title of today's podcast is Nation Against Nation. That's what we're going to be dealing with here. We have some flare-up with Israel and Palestine. I'm going to read an article, I believe it was out of Reuters here momentarily. Last month we spoke about U.S. Coast Guard and U.S. naval ships firing warning shots at various Iranian speedboats. Well, that's back in the news again today. 30 warning shots were fired by U.S. military ships against Iranian speedboats once again. So this continues to be an reoccurring event. Hopefully that resolves itself peacefully. But again, when you have these types of opponents, because that's what we are here, enemies, opponents, whatever you want to call us, in the same area, running various exercises, doing this, doing that, something can go wrong. It could be an accident. It could be a government using an excuse, making something up as a false flag to get us back into war, back into conflict. Pay attention to these stories. They are very big. They can develop very, very quickly. We still have, the issue in France with military leaders in an open letter stating that France may descend into a civil war. This is France. We're not talking about Argentina or Venezuela or Turkey. We're talking about France. Okay, pay attention to this. You have a referendum movement and an independence movement underway in Scotland, wanting to remove themselves from the United Kingdom, from the UK, because of Brexit. That may very well gain some traction. We have German elections. We have the Olympics in Japan in a couple months, and that may not happen. A lot of Japanese are not happy that that's going to take place. Petitions are being signed. So that may get canceled. It very well may get canceled. You have Australia increasing their military budget, presumably to show in a show of defense, in a show of unity with the United States against China. And there are some other things trade-related that have been taking place between Australia and China, so there are some tensions going on there. And China has been a major trading partner with Australia, basically keeping Australia out of recession for the past 20 years, of course, minus COVID, the restrictions and lockdowns that put them in a recession. But other than that, I mean, Australia supplies China with so many commodities, it's not even funny. Then on to Russia. We have Russia in the tensions with Ukraine. We have the tensions with the United States and Venezuela, the U.S. in Iran, Israel, Iran, Syria, all of this stuff. Syria is a quagmire. Lebanon is a quagmire. Turkey is a mess. It's nation against nation. It's China in Hong Kong. It's China in Taiwan. It's China in the Philippines. Again, we can hope and pray that all of this stuff resolves itself peacefully. But typically when you see these types of movements of nation against nation, it doesn't end too well. This is sort of reminiscent of World War I. And I'm going to start doing a little bit more studying of World War I because I've always found it interesting, but always focused more on World War II. But this, from what I understand, is very, I don't want to necessarily say reminiscent, but it's eerily similar in a lot of ways to World War I, before World War I got started. So this is something that it needs to be front and center. Not all of these other crackpot stories that they fill our minds with on the mainstream media, if you will let them. Got to focus on these bigger ticket items. These are the real items. These are real people. These are people who are suffering. So pay attention to them. Again, this is out of Reuters. Palestinian rocket fire. Israeli strikes in Gaza run into the second day. Palestinians fired uninterrupted barrages of rockets into Israel as its military pounded Gaza with airstrikes through the early hours of Tuesday in a dramatic escalation of clashes in Jerusalem. Explosions shook buildings throughout Gaza, and rocket sirens sent Israelis in many southern towns scurrying for shelter overnight. 2 Palestinians were killed and more than 100 wounded in airstrikes, according to Palestinian officials. 6 Israelis were wounded by a rocket, according to medics on the ground. 9 children were among the 20 dead in Gaza on Monday, and scores of rockets were launched into Israel, many that were intercepted by missile defenses. The events were unleashed by Gaza militants firing on the Jerusalem area for the first time since a 2014 war, crossing what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called, quote, a red line. And don't forget, his political career is not so certain either, that of the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The upsurge in violence came as Israel celebrated Jerusalem Day, marking its capture of East Jerusalem in the 1967 Arab-Israeli War. The escalation began with confrontations at Al-Aqsa Mosque in the heart of the walled Old City on the compound known to Jews as Temple Mount and to Muslims as the Noble Sanctuary, the most sensitive site in the Israel-Palestinian conflict. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society said more than 300 Palestinians were injured in clashes with Israeli police who fired rubber bullets, stun grenades, and tear gas in the compound. Police said 21 officers were hurt. Although the trouble died down after a few hours, there were other focal points of tensions, such as the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of East Jerusalem, just north of the Old City, where several Palestinian families face eviction from homes claimed by Jewish settlers in a long-running legal issue. And of course, that is getting much, much worse. Hamas, the Islamist militant group that controls Gaza, set an evening deadline for Israel to remove its police from Al-Aqsa in Sheikh Jarrah. When it expired, sirens wailed in Jerusalem and rockets pounded the city's outskirts. Israel views all of Jerusalem as its capital, including the eastern part annexed after the 1967 war, in a move that has not secured international recognition. Palestinians want East Jerusalem for the capital of a state that they seek in Gaza and the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Hamas and the smaller Islamic Jihad militant group claimed responsibility for the rocket fire on Jerusalem. The Israeli military said it struck targets that included militant operatives, attack tunnels, and the home of a Hamas battalion commander. Of the 20 Palestinians killed on Monday, 7, including 3 children, were family members who died in an explosion in the town of Beit Hanan, though it was unclear if it had been caused by an Israeli strike or a Palestinian rocket that had fallen short. Tensions had been building for weeks during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, amid clashes between Israeli security forces and Palestinian protesters, prompting international concern that events could spiral out of control. They most definitely could. Let's pray that they don't. But there you have it, folks. It is nation against nation. A lot of cases, it's nation against itself. A lot of civil wars, territorial disputes within borders. People are struggling. People have been struggling. There's going to be a lot of hoarding that takes place. There's going to be a lot of strikes, a lot of labor disputes. So that's just going to add to supply shortages and supply chain disruptions because people are going to stop working. They're going to demand change. That's how they're going to stop the system. That's how they're going to get it done. In any sense of a peaceful solution is to stop working, because there you're not picking up guns and rifles and rocks and anything else. You're just saying, look, we're demanding change. Enough's enough. The wealth inequality in one country after the next is enough. That's a very popular argument. It's something that gains a foothold. And look, again, I don't demonize wealth. If you have a better mousetrap, if you have a better product, if you're offering a better service, more power to you. I want you to be successful, and you're going to reap those benefits. But when there is so much distortionary effects at play because of government intervention, picking winners and losers, and central banks doing the same, picking winners and losers, well, that is something to protest. And let's just hope that it's done peacefully. So I anticipate a lot of inflation. It's already here, but the effects of inflation, I anticipate, especially in the things that we need. Commodity prices, food, energy, what have you. That's going to lead people to the streets. Frustration on so many fronts, structural issues, one after the next, one country after the next. People are going to go on strike. They're going to stop working. That's going to fuel it. It's going to make these things worse. It's going to increase prices. But people are going to say it's worth it because it's about their future. It's about their future prosperity. It's about the future for their children. So if that's what they got to do, if that's the most peaceful way that they can do it, it's going to be done. And of course, we already see a lot of it descending into violence. And I unfortunately anticipate that there will be a lot more violence too. So pay attention. Pay attention to these stories. Pay attention to the Capital News, because this is what we focus on, and anybody else who focuses on these stories, because this is where you need to focus your efforts. It is on the intersection of economics, politics, and social issues. And this is what comes of it when these things run amok. So stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Capital News. I am Alex Karitis. Godspeed.